They came back, or they are coming back, or you can feel it coming. That specific particular shift in the atmosphere that precedes the reach. A sudden presence at the edges, the message that does not need to be sent, the reason to be in contact that is thin enough to see through if you are paying attention. And everything you built, the walk away, the grief, the forward motion, the genuine okayness that was so hard to construct and so easy to feel slipping the moment their name appears. All of it is suddenly in question, not because it was not real, because the nervous system that was conditioned by this specific person in this specific dynamic does not care how real the work was. It responds to the stimulus before the work has a chance to participate. That response is not weakness. It is not evidence that nothing changed. It is the predictable, biological, completely understandable reaction of a system that was trained over a significant period of time to treat this person's presence as significant. The training does not uninstall because you understood it. It uninstalls through repeated experience of responding differently. And the first time the stimulus returns after the walkaway, the first time they come back, is the most important repetition of all. Because here is what nobody prepares you for adequately. The coming back feels different from what you expected. It feels like resolution, like the proof that the work paid off, like the validation that you were right to believe in the connection, like the moment the story finally gets the turn it was always supposed to get. It is not that, and knowing it is not that, holding that knowledge steady against the flood of everything the return activates, is the whole challenge, the one that everything in this conversation exists to help you meet. Why they came back, the honest version, not the version that hope tells, the honest one. They came back because the genuine walkaway did what nothing else could do. It made the loss real. It converted the theoretical possibility of losing you, which the defended life had always been able to manage from a comfortable conceptual distance, into the actual, felt, daily experience of you being gone, your warmth absent, your investment withdrawn, your life visibly genuinely moving forward without them in it. That experience activated the avoidance system in the specific way described throughout this conversation. The reckoning built. The story that justified the distance developed cracks. The defended life revealed the specific hollowness that only becomes fully visible when the thing that was providing the warmth underneath the defense is no longer there. And from that activation, the reach happened. Small, tentative, carrying maximum plausible deniability, but real, a genuine expression of the feeling that the reckoning surfaced. Here is the critical part. The activation that produced the reach is real. The feeling underneath the reach is real. And none of that means the architecture has changed. The reach is the avoidance system responding to the pain of loss. It is not the avoidance system having done the work that would make receiving them back safe. Those are two completely different things. And the entire history of this dynamic, every previous cycle of distance and return, is the proof that the feeling produces the reach without the architecture changing, that the pain of loss activates the movement toward you without the movement being grounded in any actual shift in the patterns that created the loss in the first place. The reach, without evidence of architectural change, is the hook being recast, different bait, same hook, and accepting it, opening the door because the reach feels like resolution, because the warmth of the return floods the system with the relief it has been missing, because the hope that was building during the walkaway finally has something to attach to. That acceptance is the beginning of the next cycle, not the end of the pattern, the resumption of it. This is the thing that must be held steady in the moment the return arrives. The reach is real, and the feeling is real, and none of that is evidence that what follows will be different from what preceded it. The cycle you are in, if you already accepted them back, because some of you are here from that place. The return happened. The acceptance happened. Maybe it was the first time they came back after a walk away, and the relief overrode everything the work had built. Maybe it was the fifth time. Maybe you are in the cycle right now, back in the warmth, back in the connection, back in the specific aliveness that the return always produces, and something in you knows that the familiar pattern is already reasserting itself underneath the warmth. The distance is coming back. You can feel it. Not dramatically, not yet, but in the small ways that you have learned to read with the accuracy of someone who has been here before. The responses getting slightly shorter, the warmth calibrating back toward the managed level, the presence that was so full in the first days of the return beginning to develop the familiar ceiling. And you are here because some part of you, the part that did the work, that completed the grief, that built the forward motion, that part is watching what is happening and recognizing it. Not catastrophizing, recognizing. The pattern is the pattern. The return did not change the pattern. The return was the pattern. Being back in it does not mean the walk away was wasted. It means the walk away needs to happen again. This time with the additional information of having experienced what the acceptance of the return actually produces. This time with less hope available to override what you know. This time closer to the real version, because the evidence is more complete and the grief has less work to do, because part of it was done last time. Every return you accept without the evidence of architectural change is data, expensive data, but data, and the data accumulates until the knowing is so thorough and so embodied that the next return, the next reach, the next warmth, the next activation of the hope meets something in you that is not the relief-flooded nervous system, but the fully informed, grief-completed, forward motion building version that knows exactly what the acceptance produces. You are closer to that version than you were before the return, even if accepting it did not feel like progress. It was. If the return is coming and you have not responded yet, this is the version with the most available choice. The reach has arrived or is arriving, and there is a window, narrow, pressure-filled, everything in your nervous system pulling in one direction, in which the different response is possible. The window feels nothing like what a moment of genuine choice is supposed to feel like. It does not feel clean or clear or empowered. It feels like the most difficult thing, like the reach is reasonable and the warmth is real, and the response that the situation seems to call for is the obvious human, not unreasonable opening of the door. The pressure in that window is significant, and it is worth naming exactly what is generating it, because the pressure is not coming from them. The pressure is coming from the conditioned part of your own nervous system that has been trained to treat their reach as something that requires a response. That experiences the not responding as a violation of something important. That generates the specific anxiety of leaving something unresolved. When resolution is right there, available, warm, asking to be accepted, that anxiety is the hook, not them. The hook is the conditioned response in you that treats their reach as something you are obligated to receive. And the rejection, the must in this title, is not aimed at them. It is aimed at that conditioned response, at the trained obligation that has been producing the acceptance every previous time the reach arrived. What the rejection actually requires in that window is not coldness toward them. It is the specific, quiet, internally directed choice to let the anxiety exist without acting on it, to feel the pull of the reach and the conditioned pressure to respond and to continue forward anyway. Not because they do not matter, because the response that the conditioned system is pushing you toward is not the response that serves you or, ultimately, them. The rejection in that moment is the practice at its most essential. The 3-second window expanded to however long the reach sits unanswered. The grounded, forward motion continuing, actually okay, regardless response. Not the flood of everything that was built during the walkaway poured back into the opening their reach created. Not the warmth that restores the hook. Just the continued forward motion. The life that keeps moving. The silence that is not hostile, but is real. What rejecting them actually looks like, not a speech. The speech is still the dynamic. The carefully worded rejection that explains why you are not accepting the return, that walks them through the psychology of why this is necessary and what would need to be different and what evidence of change would look like. That speech is still organized around them, still aimed at them, still hoping to produce a specific response in them. The real rejection is behavioral. It is the not responding that continues long enough to be unambiguous without being cruel. The warmth that does not flood back into the opening. The door that does not swing wide simply because someone knocked. If a response is necessary, if the reach was direct enough that silence would be its own kind of cruelty, then it is brief, warm but bounded, something that acknowledges their presence without restoring their access, something that communicates in the fewest possible words that you are okay and you are moving forward, and this is not the moment for what they are reaching toward. Not because you do not care, because you do, because the version of you that accepts the return without evidence of change is not doing either of you any favors, not yourself, because the acceptance restores the structure that was costing you, not them, because the acceptance removes the only pressure their system has ever encountered that was real enough to produce genuine reckoning. The rejection protects you, concretely, from the next cycle, from the warmth that peaks and recedes, from the ceiling that never moves, from the in-between that resumes as if the walk-away never happened, and the rejection reaches them in the only way that their system responds to, not through words or explanations or patient expressions of what you need, through the behavioral reality of your continued departure, through the experience of reaching and finding that the warmth does not simply restore because the reaching happened, through the specific, undeniable data point accumulating evidence that you are not the same person who accepted the return every previous time, that something has genuinely changed, that the access they had to you is no longer available on the same terms. That evidence, delivered not in what you say but in what you do not do, is the only thing that creates real movement in the avoidance architecture. Not pressure, not explanation, not patience. The behavioral reality of someone who has decided that the return without change is not something they are available for. The part that is only about you, and here is where the both of the titles promise lands fully. The rejection protects you. The rejection reaches them. Both true. And the one that matters most, the one that is non-negotiable regardless of what it produces in them, is the protection. Because you have done the work. You completed the grief. You built the forward motion. You inhabited the space. You developed the genuine okayness that was so hard to construct. You demonstrated through daily, imperfect, continuing behavior that your life is worth fully inhabiting without their presence in it. The return, accepted without evidence of change, undoes that. Not immediately, not completely, but in the specific incremental way that re-exposure to the trigger rebuilds the conditioning that the walkaway was dismantling. Each cycle accepted is harder to leave than the last, because each cycle adds to the investment, and the investment makes the leaving more costly, and the costliness makes the next acceptance more likely. The rejection is the protection of everything the work built, the preservation of the self-respect that the walkaway expressed, the maintenance of the behavioral reality that your presence is not unconditionally available, that access to your warmth is contingent on a dynamic that actually meets you, that the walkaway was not a temporary negotiating position, but a genuine expression of where you are and what you are no longer available for. Protecting that, holding the walkaway real in the face of the return, is the act of self-respect that all of this has been building toward. Not the walkaway itself, the holding of it when everything in the conditioned system is pulling toward release. That holding is the most important thing you will do in this entire arc, more important than the leaving. Because leaving is easier than staying left when they come back warm and real and asking to be received. Staying left, holding the walkaway real in the face of the warmth, is where the self-respect is actually demonstrated, not in the decision, in the holding. And the holding is possible. Not easy, not without the pull, not without the cost of the grief that the rejection renews, but possible. Genuinely, practically, you have already built what it requires possible. The work you did was for this moment. The grief, the forward motion, the genuine okayness, all of it was building the specific internal resource required to hold the walkaway real when the return arrives. You have that resource, you built it. It is yours. Use it now. the avoidant will come back, and you must reject them. Not with coldness, not with cruelty, not with the speech that is still the dynamic, with the quiet, grounded, forward motion, continuing reality of someone who knows exactly what the acceptance produces and has decided, finally, completely, from the place the work built, that they are not available for it, not anymore. That decision is the whole thing, and everything after it. The next part of this conversation, the specific texture of what the holding requires and what it builds and what it eventually makes possible, that is where we are going next. Here is what the holding actually feels like from the inside, not the concept of it, the daily, physical, sometimes hour by hour reality of staying reft when everything that was conditioned by this relationship is pulling toward the return. When the reach is sitting there unanswered and the anxiety that the unanswering generates is loud and specific and has a quality that ordinary discomfort does not have, a quality of wrongness, like you are doing something that violates a rule that was written into you at a level deeper than conscious choice. That quality is important to understand because it is going to be present throughout the holding. It is not going to disappear after the first day or the first week or even the first month. It is the conditioned response doing what conditioned responses do, generating sufficient discomfort to motivate the behavior that relieves it. And the behavior that relieves it is the acceptance, the opening of the door, the restoration of the warmth that the rejection is withholding. The discomfort is not a sign that the rejection is wrong. It is the sign that the rejection is real, that it is actually costing something, that the holding is genuine rather than performed. Because performed rejection does not produce this quality of discomfort. Performed rejection is organized around the anticipated relief of the desired response. It is uncomfortable in the way of waiting rather than in the way of loss. Real rejection, the kind that is not aimed at producing a response but is genuinely organized around your own forward motion, produces the loss directly. The grief that the acceptance would have temporarily suspended is present, fully, without the buffer of hope that the door might still open into something different. That grief is the cost of the holding, and it is worth paying, but it needs to be paid honestly, felt fully, not bypassed, in order for the holding to remain real rather than collapsing under the weight of the unacknowledged cost. The specific temptations of the holding period, they are not what you expect. The obvious temptation, the simple, direct impulse to respond to the reach and let them back in, that one you are prepared for. You know what it is and what it produces, and the preparation for it is part of what the work built. The temptations that are harder are the ones that look like something other than what they are. The first is the compassion temptation. The reach is real and the feeling underneath it is real. And you know, with the specific embodied, hard-won knowledge of someone who understands this psychology deeply, that what they are experiencing in the absence is genuinely painful. The reckoning is not comfortable. The confrontation with what the defended life costs is not easy. And the part of you that loves them, that never stopped loving them, that completed the grief without the love disappearing, that part wants to relieve the pain, wants to respond to the genuine feeling with the genuine warmth that is still there underneath the holding. The compassion temptation is sophisticated because it is not dishonest. The compassion is real. The impulse to relieve their pain is genuinely loving. But acting on it, opening the door because the feeling underneath their reach is real and you do not want to be the source of their pain, is the acceptance in compassionate clothing. And the acceptance, however compassionately motivated, produces the same outcome regardless of the motivation behind it. The structure resumes. The pattern continues. The reckoning that was building gets relieved before it completes its work. Real compassion in this situation is the holding, not because it is comfortable for either of you, because the avoidance architecture does not change through the relief of loss. It changes through the sustained experience of loss that has no available outlet through your accommodation. The compassionate thing, the thing that actually serves them if serving them is the goal, is to let the reckoning complete, to let the absence be the absence long enough for its full weight to be felt and processed, rather than immediately relieved by the return of your warmth. That is a harder compassion, a less immediately gratifying one, but it is the one that actually reaches the place where change is possible. The second temptation is the clarity temptation, the impulse to respond, not with full acceptance, but with a carefully worded message that explains where you are. That communicates the rejection with sufficient context, that they understand it is not indifference, but a boundary grounded in self-respect. That gives the holding a framework, so it does not land as abandonment. This is the speech again, dressed up as clarity rather than as explanation. And the speech, however carefully worded, however psychologically sophisticated, is still the dynamic, still aimed at them, still hoping to produce a specific understanding in them, still giving the reach something to respond to, still providing the engagement that the holding is supposed to withhold. The clarity temptation is harder to resist than the simple acceptance because it feels responsible. It feels like the emotionally intelligent version of the rejection, the version that holds the boundary while treating them with dignity, the version that the psychologically sophisticated person does, rather than the cold silence that less self-aware people produce. But the effect on the avoidance system is the same. A response is a response. Engagement is engagement. The door that opened to deliver the context is still the door opening, and a door that opened once can be opened again. The holding that produced the message about the holding is not the holding. Continued forward motion is the holding, the unanswered reach that stays unanswered long enough to be unambiguous. Not forever, not with cruelty, but long enough to be real. That is the holding. What is happening in them during the holding, because understanding it does not mean you need to respond to it, but it is worth knowing accurately rather than imagining it in the ways that make the holding harder. The avoidant during the holding period is not fine. The reach went unanswered. The activation that produced the reach did not get the relief it was seeking, and the system that was managing the loss from the defended distance is now managing it from the specific, more acute position of having reached and found nothing. That experience, reaching and finding nothing, is qualitatively different from the experience of you being simply absent. It is the confirmation that the absence is chosen, that the walk away was real, that the warmth is not available simply because the reaching happened. And that confirmation does something to the avoidance system that the ordinary absence does not. It removes the last available comfort of the defended position, which was the implicit knowledge that the warmth was there, even if not currently drawn on, that you were still invested, still caring, still available at the level of the person who had not yet fully moved on. The unanswered reach removes that knowledge, replaces it with the specific, undeniable data that the availability has actually withdrawn. That data lands in the defended interior and joins the accumulated weight of the reckoning that was already building, and it intensifies the reckoning in a way that accelerates the internal confrontation that the defended life was designed to avoid. This is not comfortable for them. It should not be understood as comfortable. They are in something genuinely difficult. The architecture that was protecting them from the cost of genuine vulnerability is being confronted with the cost of maintaining itself. The escape hatch is still there, but the thing it was protecting them from losing, your presence, your warmth, the specific and irreplaceable quality of what existed between you, is no longer available through the hatch. The question the reckoning is forcing, the one the defended life was specifically constructed to avoid, is arriving in its most acute form. Is the protection worth what it is costing? Is the defended life, functional, self-sufficient, never quite full, worth the sustained, accumulating, no longer deniable absence of what you represented? That question has no comfortable answer, and the discomfort of it, held without the relief of your warmth being available, is what produces the possibility of genuine change, not the certainty of it. The possibility, the conditions under which the architecture can begin to shift, if the willingness to let it shift is present. Your holding is what creates those conditions. The compassionate thing and the self-protective thing And the only thing that reaches the architecture thing are all the same thing, the holding. When the reach escalates, because it will, the unanswered small reach produces a larger one. The tentative, plausibly deniable contact that met silence generates something more direct, more exposed, more genuinely vulnerable than the defensive system would normally authorize. And this is the moment that breaks most holdings, because the escalated reach does not look like the hook. It looks like the breakthrough. It looks like the thing you have been waiting for, the genuine vulnerability, the direct acknowledgement, the reach that is not covered by plausible deniability, but is just honest. Here, saying something real. The escalated reach is where the compassion temptation is strongest, where the clarity temptation is loudest, where the part of you that loves them and has been doing the hard work of the holding and has been paying the daily cost of the grief and the forward motion and the unanswered reaches, where that part says, this is different. This is the real thing. This is the evidence of the reckoning producing genuine movement. Maybe it is. Maybe the escalated reach is the architecture beginning to shift. Maybe the vulnerability in it is the first real evidence of something different, rather than just the defense system escalating its tactics when the minimum viable reach failed to produce the restoration of access. How do you tell the difference? You cannot. Not in the moment. Not with certainty. The escalated reach that is genuine architectural movement and the escalated reach that is the defense system's escalated tactic look identical in the moment of their arrival. The feeling underneath both is real. The vulnerability in both is real. The genuine nature of the expression in both is real. What is different is not the reach itself, but what follows it. Over time, whether the vulnerability of the escalated reach is the beginning of a sustained shift or a temporary peak that recedes back into the defended baseline once the immediate pressure of the unanswered reach is relieved, which means the answer to the escalated reach is not the opening of the door, it is the continued holding, but with a modification. Not the silence that met the small reach, something brief, warm, but bounded, that acknowledges the vulnerability without restoring the access, that receives the genuine feeling without allowing the reception to be mistaken for the restoration of the structure. Something simple. I hear you. I am not in a place to receive this right now. That is all. Not the explanation, not the context, not the framework. Just the acknowledgement and the boundary in their simplest form, and then the continued forward motion, which is the only context in which the acknowledgement means anything. The boundary that is stated without the behavior to back it up is not a boundary. The behavior is the holding, and the holding continues. The length of the holding, there is no formula, no specific number of weeks or months after which the holding has done its work, and the door can open without the opening being the resumption of the old structure. What there is instead is evidence, specific, observable, behavioral evidence that is distinct from feeling, and distinct from the escalated reach, and distinct from the temporary vulnerability produced by the pressure of the unanswered contact. The evidence looks like this: sustained accountability over time, rather than in a single moment of vulnerability. The acknowledgement of the pattern that does not arrive in the heat of the unanswered reach and then disappear once the pressure is relieved. The concrete, specific, what have I actually done, rather than what am I feeling right now orientation to the question of change. The presence of therapy or genuine self-work, or some form of actual engagement with the architecture rather than the feeling-generating words that sound like insight without any structural change behind them. The evidence is not a declaration. It is a pattern. It takes time to become visible as a pattern. And the holding, the continued daily imperfect holding, is what creates the time for the pattern to emerge or fail to emerge. If the pattern emerges, if the evidence accumulates in the direction of genuine architectural shift rather than the temporary vulnerability of the pressure-produced reach, then what the holding eventually makes room for is the real conversation, the one that was never possible inside the old structure because the structure was designed to prevent it. The conversation between two people who are both, finally, fully present, not managing, not defended, not organized around the escape hatch, or the hope of the in-between resolving, or the relief of the acceptance ending the discomfort of the holding. Just present with what is true. That conversation is the destination the holding is building toward, not the restoration of the old warmth. The beginning of something that neither of you has accessed in this relationship yet. Something built on the foundation of the holding rather than on the foundation of the structure the holding dismantled. That something, if it arrives, if the evidence supports it, if both people are genuinely capable of and willing to build it, is worth the holding, worth the grief, worth the daily, imperfect, sometimes breaking and continuing practice of staying left when the return arrived. And if it does not arrive, if the evidence fails to materialize, if the reckoning stays internal and the architecture stays defendant and the reach exhausts itself without producing the genuine shift, then the holding was still worth it. For the same reason everything in this entire arc has been worth it. Not for what it produced in them, for what it built in you, the self-respect that holds, the self-trust that continues, the relationship with yourself that demonstrates daily that you are worth the difficulty of the holding, that your presence is worth protecting, that the life you built in the walkaway is worth maintaining in the face of the reach. That worth is not contingent on their response. It was never contingent on their response. It is yours, built in the hardest conditions, permanent in the way that only things built through genuine difficulty are permanent. The avoidant will come back, and you must reject them, not forever necessarily, not with the door sealed and the possibility eliminated, but for now, until the evidence, until the pattern, until the architecture that the holding is pressuring has shifted enough to make the opening into something different from the resumption. Hold, continue, move forward. The holding is the love, for them and completely for yourself, both at once, always both at once. There is a specific kind of tired that arrives somewhere in the middle of the holding, not the tired of the walkaway, not the tired of the grief or the forward motion or the daily imperfect practice of staying left. Those have their own exhaustion, and that exhaustion is real and has been named adequately throughout this conversation. This is a different tired, quieter, more fundamental, the tired of someone who has been doing the hard thing for long enough that the hard thing has stopped feeling like courage and started feeling like just the texture of every day. The tired of someone for whom the holding has become the new normal, and the new normal is exhausting in a way that the original dynamic, for all its cost, was at least familiar enough to navigate on autopilot. This tired has a voice, and the voice says something specific, something that sounds reasonable enough that you almost miss what it is actually saying. It says, how long? How long does the holding last? How long before the evidence is sufficient? How long before the rejection that was supposed to be temporary becomes permanent by default? How long before the self-protection that was supposed to create the conditions for genuine change becomes the wall that prevents any change from being recognized even when it arrives? How long before doing the right thing becomes indistinguishable from just being alone? That question deserves a real answer, not the framework answer, not the it depends on the evidence answer that is technically accurate and practically unsatisfying. The real answer that acknowledges the weight of the asking and the legitimate exhaustion behind it. The honest answer to how long the holding lasts until one of two things happens, not three things, not a range of possibilities. 2. Either the evidence arrives, the specific behavioral, pattern over time evidence of genuine architectural shift that the previous part of this conversation described, the accountability that sustains itself beyond the pressure of the unanswered reach, the concrete engagement with actual work rather than the feeling generating insight sounding words, the consistency that builds rather than peaks and recedes, the presence of something genuinely different in how they are showing up, not in what they are saying, in what they are actually doing across enough time that it constitutes a pattern rather than a moment. That evidence, when it arrives with sufficient accumulation, is the answer to how long. The holding lasted long enough for the evidence to emerge. And what the evidence makes possible, the real conversation, the genuine assessment of whether what they are now capable of is what you actually need, is what comes next. Or the holding becomes the answer itself, not as defeat, as the natural completion of a process that produces its own clarity, because sometimes the evidence does not arrive. The reckoning stays internal, the architecture stays defended, the reach exhausts itself, and the silence that follows the exhaustion is not the silence of someone doing the internal work, but the silence of someone who retreated back into the defended life when the pressure of the unanswered reach finally subsided. And in that silence, the one that follows the exhaustion of the reach rather than preceding the evidence of change, the holding completes its final work, not the work of creating conditions for their change, the work of completing your own, the work of arriving at the specific, embodied, no longer theoretical knowledge that the absence of the evidence is itself the answer to the question of what was available here. That knowledge, arrived at through the holding, rather than through the argument or the explanation or the patient hope that one more conversation would finally produce clarity, is the most complete form of grief, because it is grief without ambiguity, without the what if that kept the previous grief from fully landing, without the suspended hope that made every previous morning temporary rather than actual. The holding that completes in the absence of the evidence produces a grief that finishes, that has a specific endpoint, where the morning gives way to something else, not the performed moving on that preceded the walk away. Actual freedom, the specific lightness of someone who is no longer suspended between the dynamic and the life, who is simply in the life, fully, with the question of the avoidant resolved not by the answer they hoped for, but by the answer the evidence provided. That resolution, however it arrives, is the answer to how long, not a timeline, a threshold, and the threshold is reached either by the evidence or by its confirmed absence, both of which are answers, both of which end the holding in a way that serves you regardless of which one it is. What you do with the tired in the meantime, because the meantime is real, the waiting for one of the two endings is real, and the tired that lives in the meantime deserves more than the instruction to continue holding. The tired is information. It is the holding telling you something about the sustainability of the current conditions, about whether the forward motion is genuinely forward, or whether it is stalled in a way that is maintaining the posture of progress without the actual movement. When the tired arrives in the quality described, not the healthy exhaustion of hard work, but the specific flatness of someone for whom the practice has become rote, it usually means one of two things. The first is that the forward motion has become performing the forward motion, that somewhere in the holding the genuine investment in your own life that was producing the real movement has shifted toward the maintenance of the appearance of the real movement. The activities continue, the behaviors continue, but the aliveness that was in them during the early period of the walkaway, the genuine rediscovery of your own life's content, has given way to going through the motions. And going through the motions produces the tired because it costs without returning. It is the effort of movement without the reward of actually moving. The correction for this is not to try harder. It is to look honestly at where the genuine aliveness went and why. Usually it went back into the background processing of the dynamic, the monitoring of whether the evidence is arriving, the management of the holding itself, as if the holding were the project, rather than the life being the project, the specific subtle reorientation of the forward motion back toward the dynamic as its reference point, measuring the life's movement in terms of what it means for the avoidance reckoning, rather than in terms of what it means for you. When the forward motion is measured against the dynamic, it stops being forward motion. It becomes a sophisticated form of the same outward orientation that characterized it before. And the correction is the same correction it has always been. The simple, direct, daily reorientation toward your own life as the primary thing, not as it relates to them. As it is, the second thing the tired sometimes means is that the holding has lasted long enough, in the absence of evidence, that the completion without the evidence is closer than you realized, that the threshold is nearer than the tired makes it feel, that what reads as exhaustion is actually the final stage of the grief, the part just before the resolution that is the hardest, because the end is close enough to feel, but not yet close enough to feel certain. This kind of tired looks different from the first kind, if you are honest about it. It does not have the flatness of the motions going through quality. It has a specific texture of fullness, of someone who has felt the full weight of this particular loss and is arriving, imperfectly and unsteadily, at the place where the weight is beginning to be sustainable rather than overwhelming. That tired is the ending approaching, not the giving up. The actual, legitimate, earned completion of something that has been in process for a long time, and the correct response to it is not to push harder or hold longer or find new resources to sustain the practice. It is to let the completion arrive, to stop extending the holding past the point where it is doing its work, and begin allowing the clarity it produced to be the thing you are living from. The version where you open the door again, because for some people, after the evidence, this is what happens. The holding lasted. The evidence arrived. The pattern emerged over sufficient time to constitute something distinguishable from the temporary vulnerability of the pressure-produced reach. The architectural shift became visible in the specific behavioral ways that the previous conversation described, and the question of whether to open the door becomes real in a way it was not before, grounded in actual evidence rather than in hope that is projecting change onto feeling. Opening the door after the evidence is not the same as accepting the return without it. It is worth being clear about this because the two can feel similar from the outside, and even from the inside, if the evidence is not being assessed honestly rather than hopefully. The test is simple, and it is behavioral. Not what they said in the escalated reach, not how they sounded in the most vulnerable moment of the holding period. What they have actually done over time, whether the accountability appeared once in a moment of pressure or has sustained itself across ordinary interactions when the pressure was not acute, whether the work they claim to have done is visible in how they show up or only in how they describe themselves, whether the consistency is present in the small, unremarkable, nobody is watching moments that are the only reliable indicators of genuine change. If the test produces a yes, if the evidence is real and sufficient, and the assessment is honest rather than hopeful, then the opening of the door is not the resumption of the old structure. It is the beginning of something that has never existed in this relationship, something that the holding made possible by creating the conditions in which the architecture could shift, and by creating anew the version of yourself that the genuine architectural shift deserves to encounter. That encounter, the grounded, forward motion built, self-respecting version of you meeting the genuinely shifted version of them, is not the old dynamic resumed. It is the first genuinely new moment in the entire history of this connection. The first moment that is not organized around the structure of the in-between, or the hook, or the escape hatch, or the defended life maintaining itself at the cost of genuine connection. And it is only possible because the holding was real, because the rejection was genuine, because the walk away that everyone said was cruel was the most loving thing that either of you has encountered in this dynamic. The version where the door stays closed, and this version is equally valid, equally worthy of being named clearly, and without the apologetic softening that tends to accompany it in conversations about healing and moving forward. The door stays closed. The evidence did not arrive. The reckoning stayed internal or exhausted itself without producing the architectural shift. The holding completed not in the opening, but in the confirmed clarity of the absence of the evidence. And that clarity, however it arrived, whatever it cost, however long the holding lasted, before it resolved into certainty, is not a failure. It is not the story of a love that was not strong enough, or a connection that was not real enough, or a person who was not worth enough to produce the change that was hoped for. It is the story of a person who loved something real, who held the walk away against enormous pressure, who refused the resumption of a structure that was costing them daily, who waited for the evidence with genuine openness to what it might produce, and who ultimately received an answer that was different from the one they hoped for, but was still an answer. An honest answer, a complete one, the kind that finishes the grief rather than suspending it indefinitely in the hope that the next cycle will be different. the door stays closed. And the life that was built in the holding, the forward motion, the genuine okayness, the self-respect demonstrated daily through behavior, that life continues, not as the consolation prize for the door that did not open, as the actual, primary, genuinely yours thing that was always the point. The avoidance architecture, staying defended, is not a verdict on your worth. It is a fact about their current capacity. And a fact about someone else's current capacity is not a referendum on your life's value or direction, or the specific, irreplaceable quality of what you are capable of building with someone whose architecture is available for what you need. What all of this was actually for, not for the avoidant to change, not for the relationship to be salvaged, not for the walk away to produce the return that produced the evidence that opened the door to the real conversation. All of that may have happened, or none of it may have happened. The outcome is not what this was for. This was for you to become someone who knows, in the body, through behavior, demonstrated across the hardest conditions available, that your presence is not unconditional, that your warmth is not infinitely available regardless of what is offered in return, that your life is worth fully inhabiting rather than perpetually deferring pending someone else's readiness. This was for the specific, hard-won, only built this way self-knowledge that comes from doing the thing you were most afraid to do and surviving it, from holding the walk away real when the return arrived and everything in the conditioned system was pulling toward the acceptance, from discovering in the actual lived experience of the holding that you are more capable of the hard thing than the fear of the hard thing ever suggested. This was for the relationship with yourself that formed in the space the dynamic was occupying, that grew in the silence, that deepened through the daily, imperfect, continuing practice of choosing yourself first, that became, quietly, without announcement, through accumulation rather than through a single transformative moment, the most important relationship in your life. That relationship is permanent. It travels with you into the next connection that has the capacity to receive everything you bring, into the daily experience of a life that is genuinely inhabited by someone who knows their worth, not as a concept, but as a daily behavioral reality, into the ordinary Tuesday afternoon where you notice, without reaching for the noticing, without it being the product of analysis or intention, that you are simply here in your life, present, okay, actually okay, and the okay is yours, not contingent, not conditional, not organized around anyone's availability or response or readiness, just yours. That was always the whole point. You found it. Now live it.